Sarah wasn't used to fancy things. She grew up on the edge of the Wild West, where the wind whispered secrets through tall grasses and the only light at night came from the stars. Her dresses were simple, her hands calloused from work, but her heart was as big as the prairie sky. Jedediah, everyone called him Jed, was different. He'd been a ranch hand, same as many others, but luck and hard work had turned him into a cattle baron. He hadn't forgotten where he came from, though. He loved Sarah for her kindness and strength, not for fancy clothes or city ways. "Are you sure about this, Jed?" Sarah asked, smoothing her plainest dress. It was her going-to-town dress, but it felt awfully simple compared to the pictures she'd seen of city ladies. Jed smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Sure as the sun rises, darling. You deserve a fancy night out. And besides," he winked, "I want to show off my beautiful wife." He took her hand, his calloused palm surprisingly gentle. They were headed to the grandest restaurant in the city, a place with crystal chandeliers and waiters who wore coats with tails. Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach, but Jed's reassuring squeeze made her feel a little braver. He knew she wasn't comfortable with all the fancy city folk, but he wanted her to experience it, to know she could fit in anywhere. Little did they know, their night would take a turn neither of them expected, and Sarah's simple dignity would be put to the test. The restaurant was even grander than Sarah imagined. Crystal chandeliers sparkled like captured stars, and the air hummed with the murmur of polite conversation. Ladies in shimmering gowns and gentlemen in dark suits filled the tables, their silverware gleaming under the soft light. Sarah felt like she had stepped into a painting. Jed led her through the crowded room, his hand warm and reassuring on her back. He spoke to the host, a man with a neatly trimmed mustache and an even neater bow tie. "Reservation for Jedediah Stone," he said, his voice calm and confident. The host smiled, but Sarah thought she saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes as he took in her simple dress. "Right this way, Mr. Stone." They were led to a table near a large window, overlooking the bustling city street. As they sat down, Sarah couldn't help but feel a little self-conscious. The other women looked so elegant and refined, while she felt like a wildflower plucked from the prairie and placed in a crystal vase. "Don't you worry none, Sarah," Jed whispered, noticing her unease. "You're the prettiest flower in this whole place." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand again. His words made her smile, and she started to relax a little. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. She had Jed, and that's all that really mattered. She straightened her back and took a deep breath, ready to enjoy her fancy night out, even if she didn't quite feel like she belonged. They opened their menus, large and leather-bound, and began to peruse the unfamiliar dishes, ready to try something new, something different. A tall, thin waiter with slicked-back hair approached their table. His name tag read Claude. He held himself with an air of superiority, his nose practically pointed at the ceiling. "May I take your order?" he asked, his voice dripping with a false politeness that didn't quite reach his eyes. He barely glanced at Jed, focusing mostly on Sarah, and not in a friendly way. Sarah, still feeling a little overwhelmed by the menu, stammered, I'm not quite sure yet."
Claude sighed dramatically.
"Perhaps something a little less challenging would suit Madame's palate? We have a lovely soup du jour, very simple." He emphasized the word simple with a subtle sneer. Jed's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, watching Claude closely. Sarah felt her cheeks flush. "I'm sure everything is lovely," she said quietly, trying to maintain her composure. "I just need a moment." Claude rolled his eyes almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Take all the time you need. We wouldn't want to rush you into anything too complicated." He turned to Jed, a slightly more respectful tone entering his voice. "And for you, sir?" Jed simply said, his voice low and steady. "We'll both need a few more minutes." Claude gave a curt nod and sauntered off to another table, where he proceeded to fawn over a group of wealthy-looking women, laughing loudly at their jokes. Sarah felt her stomach twist into a knot. She wished she could disappear. The fancy night out was turning into a nightmare, and it was all because of a cruel waiter with a sharp tongue. Jed reached for her hand again, his grip firm and reassuring, but the damage was done. Sarah's confidence was shattered, and the sparkle in her eyes had dimmed. Jed watched Claude's retreating back, his eyes narrowed. He wasn't a man of many words, but he was a man of deep feelings, especially when it came to Sarah. He saw the hurt in her eyes, the way she shrunk back in her chair. He knew how much she had wanted this night to be special, and Claude had ruined it with his snide remarks. He clenched his fist under the table, fighting back the anger that threatened to erupt. He wanted to grab Claude and tell him exactly what he thought of his behavior, but he knew that wouldn't solve anything. Sarah wouldn't want a scene. She was too kind, too gentle. So, he kept his anger in check, a silent fury simmering beneath the surface. He knew he had to do something, but he had to do it in a way that would protect Sarah and restore her dignity. He couldn't let Claude get away with treating her like that. No one treated Sarah that way, and got away with it. He glanced around the room, taking in the other diners. Some of them had clearly overheard Claude's comments, and he could see a mixture of amusement and discomfort on their faces. He knew that Sarah's humiliation had been public, and that made it even worse. He squeezed Sarah's hand again, his grip a little tighter this time. "Don't you pay him any mind, darlin'," he said softly. "He's just trying to make himself feel important. He ain't worth your worry." But Jed knew that words weren't enough. He needed to do something more, something that would show Claude and everyone else that Sarah deserved respect, not scorn. The gears in his mind began to turn, and a plan began to form, a plan that would involve a lot more than just a strongly worded complaint. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. I need to go to the ladies' room," she whispered, her voice trembling. She couldn't bear to sit there any longer, feeling the weight of Claude's judgment and the stares of the other diners. Jed nodded understandingly. "Of course, darlin'. You go ahead. I'll be right here." He watched as she rose from the table, her shoulders slumped slightly. He hated seeing her so upset. As Sarah hurried away, Jed signaled to another waiter, a young man with kind eyes. "Could you please bring me the owner of this establishment?" he asked, his voice polite but firm. The waiter looked surprised but nodded and disappeared into the back. Jed waited patiently, his mind racing. He knew what he had to do, and he wasn't going to waste any time. Meanwhile, Sarah stood in front of the mirror in the ladies' room, trying to compose herself. She splashed cold water on her face, hoping to wash away the humiliation. She felt like she didn't belong in this fancy world, that she was just a simple country girl trying to be something she wasn't. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She wouldn't let Claude's words define her. She was strong, she was kind, and she was loved. She would hold her head high and face whatever came next. But as she walked back to the table, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She knew that Jed wouldn't let this go, and she was worried about what he might do. She just hoped that whatever he had planned wouldn't make things worse. All she wanted was to go home, back to the familiar comfort of the prairie, where she could be herself without fear of judgment. The owner, a portly man with a worried expression, approached Jed's table. "Mr. Stone? I understand you wish to see me." Jed stood up, his tall frame towering over the owner. "That's right," he said, his voice calm but with an underlying steeliness. "I have a proposition for you." He glanced towards the ladies' room, ensuring Sarah wasn't returning just yet. He lowered his voice slightly. "I'm interested in purchasing this restaurant." The owner's eyes widened in surprise. "Purchasing the entire restaurant?" "That's correct," Jed replied. "Lock, stock, and barrel." The owner hesitated, glancing around the room. "Well, I hadn't really considered selling, but everything has a price, I suppose." "Indeed," Jed said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer. More than it's worth, perhaps." The owner's eyes gleamed with interest. "And what would that offer be, Mr. Stone?" Jed named a sum that made the owner's jaw drop. It was an exorbitant amount, enough to set him up for life. I need to think about this," the owner stammered, clearly overwhelmed. "Of course," Jed said. "But I need an answer soon. I'm a busy man." He paused. "Tell you what, I'll step outside for a bit, give you some time to consider." But when I come back, I need a decision. Jed turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving the owner in a state of bewildered excitement. He needed to make a quick call to set a few things in motion. Sarah was still in the ladies' room, unaware that her husband was about to change their lives forever. He stepped onto the busy sidewalk, pulled out a small device, and began to speak, his voice low and purposeful. "Get me Mr. Abernathy."
Now.
Before Sarah could return to the table, Jed re-entered the restaurant. He caught the young waiter's eye and asked him to deliver a quick message to Sarah in the ladies' room. "Tell her I had some urgent business come up, and I had to step out for a bit. Tell her I'll be back soon." The waiter nodded and hurried off to find Sarah. Jed then turned his attention back to the owner, who was pacing nervously near the entrance to the kitchen. "Have you made a decision?" Jed asked, his voice brooking no argument. The owner swallowed hard. "Yes, Mr. Stone. I've decided to accept your offer." "Excellent," Jed said, a satisfied glint in his eyes. "I have my lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, on his way. He should be here shortly with the necessary paperwork." Just then, Sarah emerged from the ladies' room, looking slightly less pale, but still troubled. "Jed, what's going on?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "The waiter said you had to leave?" Jed smiled reassuringly. "Just a little business, darlin'," he said, taking her hand. "Nothing to worry about. It'll all be over soon, and then we can enjoy our fancy dinner." He squeezed her hand gently, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something big was happening. Jed was acting strangely, and she didn't like it one bit. She had a feeling that their night was about to get even more complicated, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. She just wanted to go home. "What kind of business, Jed?" she pressed, a knot forming in her stomach. He just smiled enigmatically and squeezed her hand again, offering no further explanation. Jed hadn't always been a wealthy cattle baron. He remembered a time when his boots were worn through, his belly was empty, and his only possessions were a beat-up saddle and a loyal horse named Bess. He'd started as a simple ranch hand, working long, hard days under the scorching sun for barely enough to keep himself alive. He wasn't afraid of hard work, though. He was strong and determined, and he had a good head on his shoulders. He learned everything he could about cattle, about the land, about the business. He saved every penny he earned, dreaming of the day he could own his own ranch. Then came the lucky break. A harsh winter decimated many herds, and Jed, who had taken extra precautions to protect his small number of cattle, found himself with a valuable commodity. He sold them at a good price and used the money to buy more land and more cattle. He treated his workers fairly, paid them well, and earned their loyalty. He was honest in his dealings, and people trusted him. Slowly but surely, his ranch grew, and his fortune grew with it. But he never forgot where he came from. He remembered the hunger, the hardship, and the feeling of being looked down upon. That's why Claude's treatment of Sarah had angered him so deeply. He knew what it was like to be judged for your appearance, and he wouldn't stand for it, not when it was happening to the woman he loved. He earned every penny through hard work, honesty, and treating others with respect, values he was determined to uphold, even in a fancy city restaurant. His past had taught him the importance of standing up for what was right, and he was about to put those lessons into practice. A few minutes later, a distinguished-looking man in a sharp suit entered the restaurant. He carried a briefcase and had an air of quiet authority about him. This was Mr. Abernathy, Jed's lawyer. Jed nodded to him, then turned to the owner. "Mr. Abernathy has the paperwork ready. If you'll excuse us, darlin'," he said to Sarah. "We need to step into your office for a few minutes." Sarah watched with growing apprehension as Jed and Mr. Abernathy followed the owner into a back room. She could hear muffled voices, but couldn't make out what they were saying. She felt completely out of the loop, and it was making her increasingly anxious. Claude, oblivious to the monumental events unfolding, sauntered over to their table, a smug look on his face. "Has Madame decided what she'd like to order yet?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Sarah glared at him. "No, I haven't," she said sharply. "And I don't appreciate your attitude." Claude raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. "Oh, I'm so sorry, madam." I didn't realize I was being offensive. Before Sarah could retort, Jed emerged from the back room, a satisfied smile on his face. Mr. Abernathy followed close behind, carrying the briefcase. Everything's settled, Jed announced, his voice loud enough for everyone in the restaurant to hear. He paused, letting the words sink in. I am now the owner of this establishment. A collective gasp went through the dining room. All eyes turned to Jed, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Even Claude looked stunned, his smug expression replaced with a look of utter confusion. The other diners stopped eating. They looked at each other. They looked at Jed. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. Sarah was the most shocked of them all. Sarah stared at Jed, her mouth agape. You bought the restaurant? She stammered, unable to comprehend what she was hearing. Jed smiled gently and took her hand. That's right, darling. I did. He turned to address the entire room, his voice booming with newfound authority. I want to thank you all for your patronage. As the new owner, I plan to make some changes around here. Changes for the better. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room, finally settling on Claude, who was still standing frozen in place, his face pale with shock. Starting with the staff. Jed strode purposefully towards Claude, his eyes blazing with righteous anger. The other diners watched with bated breath, sensing that something dramatic was about to happen. Claude, finally realizing the gravity of the situation, tried to stammer out an apology. Mr. Stone, I didn't realize. Jed cut him off with a wave of his hand. You realized exactly what you were doing, he said, his voice cold and hard. You thought you could treat my wife with disrespect because she doesn't dress like these fancy city women. You thought you could make her feel small and insignificant. He stepped closer to Claude, his towering presence intimidating. Well, you were wrong. My wife is the most kind-hearted, generous, and beautiful woman in the world, and I won't tolerate anyone treating her with anything less than respect. He paused, then delivered the final blow. You're fired. The room erupted in whispers. The diners were on the edge of their seats. What would happen next? Sarah was still in shock. She couldn't believe what Jed was doing for her. A murmur rippled through the room. Some diners gasped, others clapped softly, and a few even cheered. They had all witnessed Claude's earlier behavior and were pleased to see him get his comeuppance. One woman, who had been particularly friendly with Claude, now looked away, embarrassed. Jed turned back to Sarah, his expression softening. He took her hand and led her to the center of the room, where everyone could see them. From now on, he announced, his voice filled with love and pride, this restaurant will be a place where everyone is treated with kindness and respect. And it will be named after the most wonderful woman I know. He paused, looking directly at Sarah, his eyes filled with adoration. I'm renaming this place Sarah's Place. Tears streamed down Sarah's face, but this time, they were tears of joy. She couldn't believe how far Jed had gone to defend her honor and show her how much he loved her. I want everyone to know that here at Sarah's Place, Jed continued, we value kindness above all else. Good food is important, but treating people right is even more important. He looked around the room, making eye contact with each of the diners. If you can't be kind, you don't belong here. And that goes for the staff as well as the customers. He smiled warmly, his eyes twinkling. Now let's all enjoy a wonderful meal, knowing that we're in a place where everyone is welcome and everyone is valued. The atmosphere in the restaurant completely changed. The tension dissipated, and a sense of warmth and camaraderie filled the air. People began to chat and laugh, and the clinking of silverware resumed. Sarah's humiliation was forgotten, replaced by a feeling of triumph and gratitude. The day's special was justice, served with a side of kindness. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Jed hired new staff, people who understood the importance of treating everyone with respect. He remodeled the restaurant, making it less stuffy and more welcoming. He replaced the crystal chandeliers with warm, inviting lights and added comfortable booths where people could relax and enjoy their meals. He also changed the menu, adding some of Sarah's favorite home-cooked dishes alongside the fancy French cuisine. He wanted Sarah's Place to be a reflection of her, warm, welcoming, and full of good food. Sarah, meanwhile, was overwhelmed with joy and gratitude. She helped Jed with the remodeling, offering her suggestions and adding her personal touch to the decor. She even started wearing her simple frontier dresses again, feeling confident and proud of who she was. The restaurant quickly became a success. People flocked to Sarah's place, not just for the delicious food but also for the friendly atmosphere and the genuine kindness of the staff. It was a place where everyone felt welcome, regardless of their background or appearance. Even some of the wealthy city women, who had initially looked down on Sarah, started coming to the restaurant, drawn by its warmth and charm. They realized that true elegance wasn't about fancy clothes or expensive jewelry, but about having a kind heart and treating others with respect. As for Claude, he was last seen working as a busboy in a diner across town, a far cry from his previous position. He had learned a valuable lesson about the importance of humility and kindness, a lesson he would never forget. And Sarah and Jed? They lived happily ever after, running Sarah's place together and spreading kindness wherever they went. They had found a way to bring a little bit of the prairie spirit to the big city, creating a place where everyone felt like they belonged. Sarah, now the inspiration behind Sarah's place, felt a profound sense of validation. It wasn't just about the fancy gesture of owning a restaurant. It was about Jed's unwavering belief in her worth, regardless of her simple background. She walked through the newly renovated space, touching the warm wooden tables and smiling at the friendly faces of the staff. She realized that Jed hadn't just bought a restaurant. He had created a sanctuary, a place where she could finally be herself, surrounded by love and acceptance. The old feelings of insecurity and self-doubt began to fade away, replaced by a newfound confidence. She no longer felt the need to conform to the expectations of the city's elite. She was Sarah, a woman of the prairie, and she was proud of it. Jed watched her, his heart swelling with love. He knew that buying the restaurant was just the first step. The real challenge was creating a lasting legacy of kindness and compassion, a place where everyone could feel valued and respected. He was determined to make Sarah's place a beacon of light in the city, a reminder that true wealth wasn't about money or status, but about the connections we make with others and the kindness we show to those around us. And as he looked at Sarah, her eyes shining with happiness, he knew that he had already succeeded. He had given her back her dignity, and in doing so, he had created something truly special. One evening, Jed surprised Sarah with a special invitation. He blindfolded her and led her to Sarah's place, which was closed for the night. When he removed the blindfold, Sarah gasped. The restaurant was bathed in candlelight, and a small orchestra played softly in the corner. Jed had arranged a private dinner for just the two of them. He pulled out her chair, treating her like a queen, and whispered sweet words of love and admiration in her ear. The new staff, all handpicked by Jed for their kindness and attentiveness, catered to their every whim, making Sarah feel like the most important person in the world. As they dined on Sarah's favorite dishes, Jed raised his glass in a toast. To Sarah, he said, his voice filled with emotion. The most beautiful, kind, and courageous woman I know. You inspire me every day, and I'm so grateful to have you in my life. Sarah's heart overflowed with love. She had never felt so cherished, so valued. She raised her own glass and smiled at Jed.
To Jed, she said,
the most wonderful husband a woman could ask for. You've shown me that true love is about more than just words, it's about actions. They clinked glasses and shared a loving kiss, sealing their bond with a promise of eternal love and devotion. As they finished their meal, Jed led Sarah onto the dance floor, and they swayed to the music, lost in each other's arms. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the candlelight and the sweetness of the music, Sarah knew that she had found her forever home, not just in Sarah's place, but in Jed's loving embrace. They were both truly happy. Word of Sarah and Jed's story spread throughout the city and beyond. People were touched by their kindness and inspired by their commitment to treating everyone with respect. Sarah's place became more than just a restaurant. It became a symbol of hope and a reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can make a big difference. Other businesses began to follow Jed's example, prioritizing kindness and respect in their own establishments. The city started to change, becoming a more welcoming and compassionate place for everyone. Sarah and Jed continued to run Sarah's place together, working side by side and spreading their message of love and acceptance. They hired people from all walks of life, giving them a chance to prove themselves and contribute to the community. They also started a foundation to support local charities and organizations that were working to make the world a better place. They donated generously to causes that were close to their hearts, helping those in need and empowering others to make a difference. And as they grew older, they never forgot the lessons they had learned that fateful night in the fancy city restaurant. They knew that true wealth wasn't about money or possessions, but about the love and kindness we share with others. They had created a lasting legacy of compassion and respect, a legacy that would continue to inspire generations to come. Sarah's place was a testament to the power of love, a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed dark and cruel. It was a place where everyone belonged, and it was all thanks to a humble frontier woman and a wealthy cattle baron who believed in the importance of kindness. Years passed, and Sarah's place continued to thrive. The restaurant became a landmark in the city, a testament to the power of kindness and the enduring strength of love. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on the bustling dining room, Sarah and Jed sat at their favorite table, sipping lemonade and watching the happy customers. They looked at each other, their eyes filled with a deep understanding and affection. They knew that they had not only righted a wrong but had also created something truly special, a place where everyone felt welcome and valued. Sarah reached across the table and took Jed's hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Thank you, Jed," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "For everything." Jed smiled and squeezed her hand gently. "It was my pleasure, darling," he replied. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, content in each other's company. They had come a long way from the dusty plains of the prairie, but they had never forgotten their roots. They had learned that true wealth wasn't about money or status, but about the love and kindness we share with others. And as they looked around the room, at the smiling faces and the warm atmosphere, they knew that they had created something that would last, a legacy of compassion and respect that would continue to inspire generations to come. Sarah's place was more than just a restaurant. It was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, love and kindness can always prevail. It all started with a cruel waiter, but it ended with a place where everyone belonged.